Do you think Musk could potentially be the right person to run Twitter right now and run it in the way that he has sort of thrown out there as a free speech touting platform? What does that look like?
I mean, there are two ways to look at this. Is obviously, as Tim was saying, the kind of political or personal motives behind it. How are you going to change the platform? Do you have some sort of agenda? Are you playing into some of his personal foibles? There's also the financial piece. Now, obviously, the moment it ceases to become a public company, most public investors won't care actually how it does financially. But he has got banks financing this thing, and that to convince them to invest in it, he had to have presented something which suggests that he will generate free cash flow in a way that will service those debt obligations. Now, what that is, we don't quite know. But of course, as a private company, he doesn't need to worry so much about growth. So you can do things which will change the cash flow. And that's when it comes back to the user. How does that change the user experience? It either means serving up more ads, finding better ad targeting, which of course would mean mining more user data. It could also mean a subscription tier. One of the things that we've seen in TV streaming or video streaming is that you had these subscription services like Netflix, of course, like HBO Max, and then Peacock came in and said, we're going to introduce an advertising-funded tier, and that will cost less. So you could see the reverse perhaps happening at Twitter, where you have an advertising-funded tier and you have a paid tier. The disadvantage of being a paid tier or having a paid service is that your upside is limited. Facebook makes $250-ish per year per user in advertising. That is clearly more than $10 a month that you might expect to pay for a subscription service. You've got to remember, though, that Twitter, as a private company, won't need to grow at the same pace. And also, it makes less per user than Facebook does right now. So it might all be upside.
There are some real reasons why being private could help Twitter after so many years of struggles, let's say. It really did trail some of its peers here when you're looking at it financially. But, Tim, this is not just a financial question. You've made the point in your column that media companies provide a public service. And we have seen lawmakers for many years now be concerned about misinformation on social media, content moderation. What does that now mean for a company that's going private?
Well, private companies are entitled to manage their affairs as they see fit. I think historically, the federal government in the United States has had an interest, and I think a constructive one, in making sure that media entities aren't conduits for propaganda. And I think that that's the reason their radar now has focused on social media companies. I think there's a little bit of romanticism that still lingers around the web, as it being this sort of garden of democratic access and a flowering of ideas and information, which of course it is. It still retains those wonderful characteristics. It's also a forum for damage and for hate speech and for a lot of other problems that I think regulators have rightly taken an interest in. And I think there's a solution here. I think there should be more regulation around the social media companies in the context of treating them like legacy media companies and treating them like responsible purveyors of information in societies that rely on that as a core proposition. I think, again, I don't think Musk has much of an interest in that. I think he can bring a lot of entrepreneurial mojo to Twitter. Twitter is still a weak user experience. The search functions aren't good. The way you create content and distribute it on Twitter could use a lot of improvement. And it's never been as innovative as it needs to be to compete with some of the other big social media platforms. I think it's undeniable that he'll bring those strengths to it. But I think he is still going to face just basic mathematic challenges here. The debt that he's taking on is going to create about $1 billion a year in interest payments for Twitter. Its projected cash flow this year is around $1.5 billion. Next year, it's about $1.8 billion. Most of the company's cash flow is going to go to debt servicing. And that's problematic unless he has some silver bullet that's going to gin up the company's revenue and profitability. And there is nothing that's been made public yet that he actually has a sophisticated plan for doing that.
Well, Alex, just piggybacking off of what Tim said, could Jack Dorsey be the silver bullet for Elon Musk? I mean, could he help turn the company around and do all of these things that Elon is proposing?
Well, Jack Dorsey's been running the company for the past 6 years, and the company, is in the situation in which it finds itself. He only stepped down towards the end of last year. If it's about just executing Elon's own ideas, do we know that Jack Dorsey is the best person for execution? One of the reasons that Twitter is, subject to Tim's quite right, justifiable criticisms is that it hasn't really evolved as a product for its entire lifespan. It's 15, 16 years old. It's kind of the same product it was when it launched. And so evolving that, do we think that Jack Dorsey can do it better as a private company than it was as a public company? Maybe. But there's no reason that someone else couldn't do the same. We don't really know how hands-on Elon's going to be. Is this going to be SpaceX, where he delegates a huge amount? He says, look, I'm not a rocket scientist. I'll let the rocket scientists run it. Or is it going to be Tesla, where he is literally CEO? Perhaps chairmanship and delegating to an effective CEO would be the most sensible way of approaching it. I'm not sure Jack Dorsey is that person.
It's interesting to think of this as a 16-year-old company that's now going private again. And Tim, you look at the other social media efforts out there, for example, former President Donald Trump and him saying to Fox that he won't use Twitter. And I'm wondering, things like this, what does it mean in terms of what Twitter will be going into the midterms, into 2024, and the discourse that it will be responsible for the next round of politics?
Well, again, we get back to, I just think, this basic issue of vetting for high quality information and monitoring for abuses. And that's going to be very important in the 2024 midterms in the US and in the 2024 presidential election. I think that's a reason Musk is present in this transaction, is because he knows Twitter, despite its relative size, is very influential in determining the public discourse within the media around salient public issues. And that is going to come to the fore this fall, and it's going to come to the fore in 2024. And I don't think Twitter has ever done enough to be a more effective steward of that particular responsibility. As Alex mentioned, Jack Dorsey oversaw Twitter for several years, and the company never got as good as it should have gotten. And Dorsey's own attentions were divided between two companies. He was the CEO of Square and the CEO of Twitter. It's hard enough being the CEO of one company, much less two. Elon Musk, I think right now, is running 5. What are they going to do managerially to make sure that Twitter is a place where people can go for constructive, healthy, sometimes combative, sometimes controversial, but ideally always useful conversations about issues that matter, rather than being essentially a stiletto, a public stiletto that guts the democratic process in the US or elsewhere and sows the seeds of really dangerous problems in people's minds.
And then also Twitter expanding beyond what it is today. You guys both made the financial point here, and Bloomberg's Eliza Reynolds-Hannon had said the interest payments alone on that debt is going to be as much as what it makes in profit this year. But then how does it invest for the future? Few people know that Twitter was one of the first platforms to work with the Lightning Network and to facilitate payments in crypto over the network. And so, Alex, I'm wondering here, what is the potential here for Twitter to become a platform for commerce in this new economy?
Well, commerce is something that a lot of people have tried, but they don't often do it just to make money out of it. Facebook does it because it helps them understand what drives a purchase for an ad. It helps improve their ads business. They don't really make money from the commerce itself. So it's a value add to a business they already have. Twitter does not have great ad targeting. It mostly does brand awareness, brand recognition, brand building. That is something that it can improve upon, but it doesn't want to put the cart before the horse. Building on something that Tim said as well, like when we think about the free speech idea and their need to moderate some content, those costs are going to increase irrespective of what Elon Musk's, because of regulation that is already coming. Just last week, the European Parliament agreed upon a set of regulations that will make it more incumbent upon the tech companies to police and moderate their content, irrespective of what Elon Musk's. Twitter doesn't have tens of billions of cash flow to chuck around in the way that Facebook does to cover some of those costs. So it is going to be a struggle to keep everybody happy, regulators and debt holders and Elon himself.